I would like to start by thanking Professor Kalaos for inviting me to talk about interprofessional collaboration and complex problem solving. I would also want to say that I'm very honored and humbled to be in the presence of some distinguished speakers. I am not having maybe the same experience as you. I'm fairly new. But I would also want to thank again to the previous speaker, because you prepared very well the place for me to talk. And I would say, hearing you talking about a student that fell asleep in class, I think I can top that. I had a student that fell asleep during the exam. So, and I told to myself, at least this student studied till this last minute, so I tried to make lemonade out of lemons. So what I'm going to talk about today, I will give you a brief introduction about my interest on complex problem solving and interdisciplinarity. Also, I will talk about the characteristics of complex problems, and then talk about the comparative approach on traditional problem solving and complex problem solving. And I'll try to link this with creativity, using creativity in complex problem solving, and interdisciplinarity. And I will finish with some implications for education and some concluding remarks. So, first of all, I'm not the regular speaker on a conference on informatics and cybernetics. I have a background in social work and a PhD in education, but I have some experience in working with interdisciplinary teams. So my first interest for complex problem solving started when I was doing my PhD in education, and that was by working on some creativity strategies that can be used when we solve complex problems. I also have experience in interprofessional collaboration. I'm conducting some research on these topics, and with this, we realized, and I will be talking a bit later about this project, because it gave us some insight on some of the advantages and the obstacles when we are collaborating, when doing research. I also having some research on ethical issues that we encounter while documenting. And I have some experience in working in interdisciplinary teams. So, from where comes the interest for complex problem solving? And everything started by questioning myself why it is important to develop skills for complex problem solving. And while doing the literature review for these topics, we realized that actually a lot of the real-life problems can be very complex. And while we are preparing very, very well the students to solve simple problems, or relatively simple problems, or well-defined problems, we are not giving them as much opportunities to work on complex problems. And yes, there were some attempts. Everything started in the 70s with the work of Dorner and Funke. I couldn't read Dorner, I don't read German, but I could read Funke and the others. And everything started from there. There is a lot of research on complex problem solving. But as I said, again, there are a lot of aspects that need to be taken into consideration. Also, there were some field observations that said, Well, yes, we prepare very well students to solve problems, but some of the skills that are needed to solve well-defined problems are not transferable to complex problems. And I would argue it's not only that. We need other set of skills. As you will see a bit later in my presentation, it's not only that we need to know how to pose a problem or to frame the problem and to represent the problem space, but it's also important to be able to collaborate with others, to communicate our thoughts, to defend our position when we look to the different solutions that the complex problems can have. We also have to be able to have some cognitive and metacognitive skills. So starting from there, I said there is a lot of work to be done. And moreover, it was not only that, some of the strategies that we use to solve problems that are well-defined they're not as efficient when we use them in complex problem solving. And as I said before, I worked on creativity and creativity strategies used for complex problem solving. And I can tell you, and I'll go back to that a little bit later, the first question the students I work with asked me were, what's the correct answer? And I said, well, you forget about that. There is no correct answer. No, but what's the correct answer? And that was a little bit of struggle, even from the beginning. It took us a lot of time to convince them, you know what, there can be several solutions, and none of them can be judged in terms of correct or not. So I think, again, and that comes from the fact that we are so used in following the rules, then when we talk about creativity, that gets out of the box. So it will be difficult for them to imagine that they can express their thoughts and not judging them in terms of correct or not. So what are complex problems? When we look at the complex problems, we can see they have several characteristics. First of all, complex problems have a complex structure. And when we talk about complex structure, now we can see they can have multiple elements that are interconnected in very various ways. One element can be connected with a lot of other elements, and not only that, but all these interconnections can be hidden. So the problem solver is not always capable to grasp these interconnections. Not only that, but we are so used when we problem solve to look at linear causality. So we think about if A determines B, the effect is very direct, it's easier to grasp, but with complex problems does not apply. We cannot think like that, because not only this connection, this causality is not linear, but it's not only multi-factor. Because here, it's not only that a factor, several factors or combined factors can determine an effect, but we also talked about the disproportionality of the relation between cause and effect. So I don't think I'm telling anything new to you when we talk about the butterfly effect. No, a small cause can bring very, very important effects. We are saying a butterfly is flapping the wings here in Florida and will produce a hurricane, I don't know, in other part of the world, just to have this metaphor. So we have to go a bit away from this idea that everything is linear. So why is this important? It is important because that will affect the way we solve the problems. Not only that, and I will go a bit back when I will be talking about complex problem solving. complex problems have very complex and non-linear dynamics. What does it mean? They change over time. Changes can appear suddenly. They can be fast-paced. And sometimes when change occurs very fast, does not allow to the problem solver to process the information, does not allow the problem solver to look for solutions or to adapt to the new state of the problem. So when I say these problems are not linear, even the process of problem solving is not linear. We cannot think of this process as a step-by-step process. I started at step A and I continue step B and so on and so forth. Actually, here, in the complex problem solving, we have to go back and reassess continuously the state of the problem. And not only that, but outcomes can be unpredictable. And if it is something that human beings don't like very much, is unpredictability. We don't like things to change. We don't like to not know what's going to happen, but, well, that's the reality. So that was another struggle that we've seen in classroom. Students want to know what is going to happen, and we have to work with them to change this attitude. We want to work with them to be more open to uncertainty and unpredictability. And I will go to the last characteristic, which is non-transparency. Non-transparency refers to the inability of problem solving to grasp all the information about the complex problems, or about the interconnections, about the dynamic, and so on and so forth. So, what is the difference between traditional problem solving and complex problem solving? And I try to organize a bit this information. I like things that are well organized. If we look at the problem type that we address in these two types of problem solving, we are used to traditional problem solving to address problems that are well defined or relatively simple. Now, I don't want to give the idea that everything we do in schools are simple problems. That's not right. We do very complicated problems, but in most of the cases, these problems are well defined. What does it mean? That means that I know the given state, or I know the goal state. I know how to get from the given state to the goal state, and this is how students are accustomed. When we talk about complex problem solving, well, we've seen how complex problems are, and not only that, but in most of the time, they are not as well defined. Students have problems with processing the entire information about complex problems, and that becomes more difficult in the problem solving process. Also, when I'm looking like that, as I said before, some aspects of the problems can be hidden, and maybe they are out of our domain of expertise. So let's say, I will give you an example. Last year we had a very powerful storm, winter storm in Canada. Well, it's not something new to have a powerful winter storm in Canada. And in the north of the province, after I would say 50 centimeters of snow, we had like 24 hours of freezing rain. And I don't know if you can imagine, but the whole north of the province was paralyzed. There was no power. The roads were not accessible. There were a lot of electric poles that were on the ground, electric wires. First responders weren't able to get to the people, and there were people that were sick and stuck in the house. So these are real problems. No? In processing this information, it's not that easy, and sometimes, where I go to this, sometimes we can't address them from a one discipline perspective. In these particular situations, a lot of professionals, a lot of people had to come together and to think of solutions that address everything. So they were first responders for the health problems, there were social workers that had to find a shelter for people that couldn't stay inside because, it was below 20, and imagine everything is electric, it was super cold, they didn't have food, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying, sometimes to look at the complex problems, we need to do it together with other people that can see aspects that we cannot see. Also, the problem-solving process is not cyclic, it's not linear. As I said before, it's non-linear. We have to continually assess the problem state because there are changes that can occur suddenly. We have to be able to be flexible when we problem solve. And I will tell you another anecdote. I can't take authorship for that. It's not coming from me, but I like to say it every time I'm talking about problem solving. In a hotel like this, the hotel management received a lot of complaints because the elevators weren't as fast. So people said, we are waiting too long, we don't like that. So the hotel management set up a team and said, okay, we have to look up solutions about that. And all the engineers came up with ideas to make the elevators go fast. But guess what? Yes, some of the complaints went away, but people still complained. And they said, okay, maybe we have to look to another solution. So they asked architects to look for, new elevator shafts to add elevators. But again, people weren't happy about that. And then we said, maybe we look at the problem wrong. Maybe the problem is not that elevators are not fast enough. Maybe the problem is that people are bored while waiting for the elevator. So, they find up with an unusual idea that was way cheaper than the previous one. They installed mirrors on both beside the doors on both parts, and guess what? People were looking in the mirror while waiting the elevator, and the time was faster. Now, I don't know if everybody is happy with that, but a lot of complaints went away. So what is the problem of that? When we look at complex problems, we can frame them differently, and for every way we frame the problem, we'll find other solutions. When we are looking at strategies from problem solving, we are very accustomed to use algorithmic strategies, step by step, as I said before. These strategies are not very successful for complex problem solving. We have to go to heuristics and creative strategies because sometimes we need to go outside of the box. So when we look for solutions, in traditional problem solving, we have one solution or predetermined solutions. The solutions usually are clear. When we look for complex problem solving, they can have multiple solutions, as I said. And I would say it's almost impossible for very complex problems to find all the solutions that are possible. And it's even more difficult to find them by working in silos. We have to work together. As I said before, these solutions cannot be judged in terms of correct or incorrect. We can judge them if they are suitable, acceptable for a certain moment in time, because as I said, the situation changes. When the situation changes, the solution will be different. They can be time sensitive. And I would add to that, we always have to think about the ethical aspects of our decisions when we propose solutions. either way, even if we work with simple problems or with complex problems, we always have to think about that. When I was working with students, education students, about complex problems, one of the solutions they proposed was, well, we can steal water from other parts of the country. I said, well, this is not really a solution because it's not ethical. So I think ethics is very important in making decisions. Also, when we look at the problem solver, in traditional problem solving, we usually work individually. Sometimes we work in teams, but when we work with complex problem solving, now we need to, this cannot be done individually. We have to work in teams. We have to work sometimes in interdisciplinary and even interprofessional teams. So, as I said, I will be talking about 2 research projects. I'm not going to bore you with details about methods and stuff. What I'm going to give you, the first research project was the use of creativity strategies for solving complex problems. And the problem that we gave the students to solve was a complex environmental problem. It was a heat wave in Moncton. Moncton is in Canada. You might ask yourself, do you have heat waves in Canada? Yes, we have. And it's more and more present. So we work with that and we ask students to propose solutions for a heat wave. What I learned about that, first of all, is if the students think the problem does not affect them, they are not as engaged. So I had to do something to make them feel that they are involved. So we started with an exercise when I asked them to close their eyes, to imagine, to listen to things. And all of a sudden, it was this radio announcement that said, well, the water is contaminated, stop used water, but they were in the shower during the exercise. So all of a sudden, that involves you because that gave them direct consequences on them. So that was it. During this research project, we did what we call the global simulation. That means we asked the students to work in an imaginary research team. This research team was interdisciplinary. Some of them played the role of health professionals. Some of them played the role of specialists in urbanism or agriculture, environment, and so on and so forth. And while working on that, they realized that every one of them had to bring input about the problem according to the role they assumed. What we found during that, we found that while working on complex problems, they said they need more time to get familiarized with the problem. They needed to explore the problem more thoroughly, and we also find that they lack some self-confidence because they said, well, this is a complex problem. That must be difficult. We are not specialists in solving complex problems. So that brought them a bit back. Also, it was difficult for them to accept that a problem can have multiple solutions. As I said, that was a struggle the whole time. It was difficult for them to use some creativity strategies. They weren't accustomed to that, and I will give you an example. One of the strategy is called the problem reversal. What you ask in this strategy is to look at the problem, and instead of trying to solve it, you try to make it worse. And what does do when we try to, and then you reverse the effects. When you do that, you actually expand the problem space, and you can look at more solutions that you don't usually take into consideration. Also, we had some observation regarding the problem-solving process. They were able to use different approaches to problem-solving, but they had problems, difficulties in managing the abundance of information. They also favored solutions that were feasible and that were efficient. They didn't like too much to think about original solutions, but if I will talk about that, I'll say some of the most important solutions come from creativity. And I'll give you an example. The fact that NASA is reusing urine to produce drinkable water, that came from the use of creativity for the astronauts that go in space. Also, students seem concerned with the quality and the potential costs of the solution they proposed. So we are still questioning ourselves about money. They were able to work in teams, but it took some adjustment to work with colleagues they didn't work with before. And you can imagine it was a research project, so they couldn't choose the people they had to work with. They had some testing done before for doing the teams. And they also expressed a need of validation. All the time we need to tell them they do well, and that work on self-confidence. Now I will go to another research project and the whole reason of talking about that, because that gives us implications for education. The second project is a project that interests interprofessional collaboration in social work when working with complex problems. That seems like a different topic that's very related. The reason I integrated this is because we looked on the advantages and obstacles when we collaborate with others in solving complex problems. What we learned, it was that people, the professionals that participated in the study, were able to say, yes, the problem is complex, but they couldn't say why the problem is complex other than the fact it's difficult to solve. So we need to give them more knowledge about that. Also, although in putting in place solutions and integrated intervention plans was easier for the people they assisted, the process, the actual process for the workers became more difficult. And we don't have the infrastructure for that yet. And the fact that they use different types of collaboration, different, I would say, degrees of complexity. So what were some of the advantages of working together collaboratively when solving complex problems? First, we can analyze together the information. That allows us what? That allows us to reduce the time on analyzing the problems, and sometimes coming exactly in time. As we said, because of the nonlinear dynamics, there are changes that will happen very fast. That will allow us to share knowledge. I'll finish. To pull different perspectives about the problem. What were the challenges? There were some ethical issues. So I don't know in other domains, but in social work, confidentiality is a really big thing. So when you share information with other professionals, that is the main topic. There can be some sources of conflict, especially because when different people with different backgrounds work together, they don't always have the same perspective on the problem. We don't always have the same approach to the problem. There were some power issues. So people are used to a certain hierarchy, and that doesn't work usually when you try to work collaboratively. Also, there were some issues with communication. Each of us has a professional jargon, and when we try to communicate to other specialists, we don't always speak the same language. Sometimes they didn't share information or share unilaterally. There were some professionals that went, well, I would like to know what you are thinking about that, but I'm not sharing my thoughts. So that can be an obstacle. And the long-distance communication. So what are the implications for education? I think we have to give students the opportunity to have knowledge about complex problems and complex problem solving. I think we have to change the attitude towards the problem. We are talking about epistemic belief, accepting uncertainty, accepting that things are unpredictable. Attitude towards himself or herself, and that starts with self-confidence. Skills, and I will not say all the skills, but we have to be flexible. We have to have argumentative skills. As I said, sometimes we have to defend the solution in the group, in the team. Communication skills, critical and creative thinking, and we have to be able to solve conflicts and to communicate with the other persons that are members of the teams. I think we have to look differently to the strategies, the pedagogical strategies that we use, and the previous speaker talked about that. We have to offer students a shared learning experience. You know, it cannot work interdisciplinary if everybody works within its program. So, and maybe to put in place interdisciplinary education programs. And I will finish by saying that I think we'll take advantage by giving the students the opportunity to work more on complex problems and authentic problems, problems that they relate to. That if we integrate systematically creativity, that will help us maybe think outside the box. And we have, as educators, I think we have a mission to change the way we prepare students, to provide them with more opportunities, and that will start, of course, by doing ourselves interdisciplinary research. Thank you very much, and I will also say I would like to thank my team, because this is not only my thoughts, but they are the thoughts that I share with my team. Thank you.